The Duke of Ashford chose the brightest afternoon of July to tell Eleanor he intended to marry another woman, and he chose to do it in her own father's rose garden, where the bees were too loud and the air too sweet for grief. "You must see that it is impossible now," Julian said. He turned his hat in his hands, a fine grey beaver hat she had once teased him for buying. "Lavinia and I, Mrs. Crane and I, we did not plan it. These things are not planned." "You left a card with my mother this morning," Eleanor said. "You sat for half an hour, drinking her ratafia. Did you not plan that?" "Eleanor, you let her speak of the breakfast at Ashford." The bride's chamber she meant to refurbish in yellow. A wasp drifted between them, and she did not flinch from it. "She is choosing curtains, Julian, for a house you now mean to give your mistress." The word landed where she aimed it. He looked at the gravel. "You needn't make it ugly," he said. "I am not making it anything. You have made it. I am only saying the thing aloud so that one of us is honest in this garden." Her gloves were buttoned to the wrist. She felt the seam of each pearl button pressing into her skin, and she held to that small discomfort the way another woman might hold a railing. The scent of the roses had turned cloying, almost rotten in the heat. Somewhere beyond the yew hedge a gardener's shears went snick, snick, patient and indifferent. Julian had the grace, at least, to be pale. He was a beautiful man, broad through the shoulder, fair-haired, the kind of face that made debutantes forget their steps, and she had loved that face for 2 seasons. She watched it now, and felt the love in her go quiet, like a candle pinched between 2 fingers. "There was an understanding between our families," she said. 3 years. Julian. Letters. You wrote to me from Bath. You signed them. I know what I signed. Your servant always. Always, you used the word. A man may be 8 and 20 and still mistake what he feels. He had found his courage somewhere and lifted his eyes to her. "Mrs. Crane makes me. She does not require me to be the Duke of Ashford every hour of the day. With you I am always being measured. You measure everything, Eleanor. You cannot help it. A man wants to be loved, not assessed." The shears stopped. She felt the insult settle into her, cold and exact, and she understood with a clarity that surprised her that this was the sentence he had come to say. The rest had been preamble. He had needed to make her the cause so that he might walk away the wounded party. "I see," she said. "Eleanor, no, you have explained yourself very thoroughly. You always were thorough when it cost you nothing." She drew a breath, and the rose smell flooded her again, and she nearly faltered, but the pearl buttons held her. "You may go out through the side gate. My father is in the library, and I would spare you both the meeting." He hesitated, as though he had expected weeping, and did not know what to do with a woman who simply stood. Then he bowed, a correct, shallow bow, the bow one gives an acquaintance, and went, his boots loud on the gravel, the grey hat going back onto his fair head before he had even reached the gate. Eleanor stood among her mother's roses until the sound of his horse had faded down the drive. Only then did her hand come up to her mouth, and only for a moment, and then it went down again to smooth her skirts, because a footman might come, and a Hartwell did not weep where the staff could carry it to the kitchens by supper. She was 24, and she had just been thrown over for a widow, and the worst of it, the very worst, was that part of her had been measuring even now, measuring how long before the ton knew, and what it would cost. By morning the ton knew. She understood it from the calling cards. 3 ladies who had promised to dine left their regrets on small stiff rectangles, each excuse more delicate than the last. A sudden megrim. An aunt arrived from Shropshire. The heat. The heat had not troubled them on Monday. Eleanor laid the cards in a row on the breakfast table, and read them the way a general reads a map of ground already lost. "Vultures," said her Aunt Beatrice, helping herself to a great deal of marmalade. "I have always said it. The instant a girl stumbles they descend with their condolences and their very best bonnets, to be sure of getting a clear view." She was a wide, handsome woman of 60, with a black wig she wore slightly askew on principle, and she had buried 2 husbands and outlived most of her enemies, which she counted the chief pleasure of old age. Eat something, child. You cannot fight a war on dry toast. I am not fighting a war, Aunt. No? Then you have already lost it. Beatrice pointed her knife. When I was jilted, oh, do not look so, of course I was jilted. Every woman worth knowing has been jilted at least the once. I went directly to the opera in my finest emeralds and laughed twice as loud as anyone in the house. The trick is to be seen enjoying yourself. It enrages them far more than tears. Despite everything, the corner of Eleanor's mouth moved. And did it answer? He married a banker's daughter with a squint and a great deal of money, and I danced at the wedding, and I have never spent a comfortable hour in his company since, which suits me admirably. Beatrice's eyes, small and bright and shrewd, settled on her niece. You loved him. I thought I did. That is worse. Thinking is harder to cure than loving. The old woman buttered another corner of toast and pushed it across the cloth. Your father is in a state, you know. The Ashford match was the prop he leaned the whole house against. Eleanor knew. She had heard, through her dressing room wall, the low grinding sound of her parents' voices the night before, her father's especially. The Earl of Wexford reduced to a man pacing his own chamber and counting debts aloud. The Hartwells were old and titled and very nearly empty. The estate at Wexford bled money the way a cut bleeds, steadily, without drama, and the Duke of Ashford's 12,000 a year had been the bandage they had all agreed not to speak of. He will want to see me, Eleanor said. He will want a great many things. Beatrice's voice gentled, which from her was alarming. Go to him, then. And, Eleanor, do not let him marry you to the first creature who offers, only to mend the books. A girl thrown over once may recover. A girl married wrong recovers never. Eleanor rose, kissed the soft powdered cheek that smelled of violets and snuff, and went to find her father. The library at Wexford House was the coolest room in summer, its shutters half drawn against the glare, the air thick with leather and old paper, and the faint mineral smell of the river 2 streets off. The Earl stood at the window with his back to the door, a small man grown smaller, and he did not turn when she entered. You will have heard, he said. Most of London has heard, Papa. He came to me this morning. Ashford, a dry, terrible little laugh, came to tell me he would settle 3,000 on you. 3,000, by way of apology, as though you were a horse gone lame in his stable, and he was being decent about the loss. The Earl's hands were behind his back, and she saw how they gripped each other. I told him to take his 3,000 to the devil. Papa, I should not have. We need it. He turned at last, and his face undid something in her chest, because he had been a vain and cheerful man all her life, and he looked neither now. I have failed you, Eleanor. I have managed everything so very badly, and now you must pay the reckoning, and I do not know how to mend it. She crossed the room and took his cold hands in her gloved ones. We will contrive, she said, with a steadiness she did not feel. We always contrive. Neither of them believed it. Outside, the bells of St. George's rang the half-hour, bright and careless over the rooftops, ringing for nobody. The Marchioness of Daleby's summer ball was the last great crush of the season, and Eleanor had every reason in the world not to attend it, which was precisely why she went. Be seen enjoying yourself, she told her reflection, fastening the clasp of her grandmother's garnets at her throat. The stones lay against her collarbone like warm drops of wine. Her gown was deep amber silk, the color of brandy held to candlelight, and it made her dark hair darker, and her grey eyes very nearly gold. And when she came down the stairs, her Aunt Beatrice put up her lorgnette and said, There, now you look like a woman who has lost nothing at all, which was the kindest lie either of them had told that week. The Daleby house blazed. 200 candles in the long gallery, hothouse lilies banked white against every pillar, the heat of so many bodies in silk turning the air heavy and floral and faintly damp. Eleanor walked into it with her chin level and felt the room turn toward her the way a field of barley turns in wind, the small adjustments, the fans lifted to cover moving lips, the eyes that found her and slid away. She had expected it. Expectation did not blunt it. Each glance was a small cold pressure between her shoulder blades, and she kept her smile fixed and her step unhurried, and thought. Snick, snick, like the gardener's shears, patient and indifferent. She lasted 40 minutes. She danced once, with a kind elderly baronet who knew her father. She took a glass of negus she did not drink. She watched. Across the gallery, the Duke of Ashford enter with Mrs. Lavinia Crane on his arm, the widow resplendent in peacock blue and triumph, and she watched the crowd open to receive them, and close again, and she understood that they had come precisely because she would be there. The world had arranged its little cruelty and pulled up a chair to watch. So she did the one thing no one expected. She set down her glass, inclined her head to the baronet, and walked out, not toward the cloakroom and the carriages, where the gossip would follow, but through a side door into the dim length of the orangery, where the music thinned to a far-off sweetness, and the air went suddenly green and cool with the smell of citrus leaves and wet stone. She was not alone. A man stood at the far end among the orange trees, a tall man in dark plain evening dress with his hands clasped behind him, looking up through the glass roof at a sky going violet with the last of the light. He did not start when she entered. He simply turned his head, unhurried, and regarded her with frank, dark eyes, and said, in English shaped by some softer continental cadence, "You are the woman they are all whispering about." "I am the woman they are all enjoying," Eleanor corrected. "There is a difference, though it is fine." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. He was perhaps 28, broad-shouldered, black-haired, with a grave and arresting face, not beautiful in Julian's polished way, but something harder and more interesting. A face that looked as though it had been carved for a coin. "Forgive me. I did not mean it unkindly. I watched you come into that room. You walked like a woman crossing her own ground, not borrowed ground." He paused. "I have spent a great deal of my life watching people walk into rooms. It is a particular study of mine. Most of them are afraid. And I am not." "You are very afraid," he said. "But you have decided it is no one's business, which is a rarer thing." He came a step nearer, and the green light moved over him. "The Duke is a fool." Eleanor went still. "You know the Duke of Ashford. I know that any man who would set you aside for that lacquered widow in the peacock feathers cannot count past 10. He said it plainly, without flirtation, the way one states a sum. "I have been 3 weeks in your country, and I have watched a great many of your nobles trade their futures for an afternoon's comfort. He is only the worst of them, and the most public." She ought to have been affronted. A strange man, alone, speaking of her ruin as though it were weather. Instead she felt, and the feeling startled her, that for the first time in 4 days someone had told her the truth, without arranging himself to profit by it. "You have the advantage of me, sir," she said. "You seem to know my circumstances entirely, and I do not even know your name." "No," he agreed. "You do not." And he smiled, just slightly, and turned back to the violet glass, leaving the orangery very quiet and the question hanging in the citrus-scented dark. She learned his name the next morning, and she learned it from the Earl, and she learned it on her feet in the library, with her heart going hard against her stays. Eleanor. Her father had a letter in his hand, a heavy creamy sheet, and the seal it had borne lay on the desk between them. Red wax, deep and glossy, stamped with a crowned device she did not recognize. "Do you know what this is? Do you know whose hand this is?" "No, Papa. It came by a footman in a livery I have never seen in my life. Blue and silver, foreign." He sat down rather suddenly, as though his legs had stopped consulting him. "It is from the household of His Royal Highness Maximilian, Crown Prince of Vent. He is the King of Vent's only son. He has been in London since June, on the business of the treaty everyone is forever talking of, and no one understands. And he writes." The Earl looked up, his face gone strange. "He writes to request the honor of calling upon you." "Upon you, Eleanor, by name." The orangery rose up whole in her mind, the green light, the carved coin of a face, the unhurried voice. "You do not even know my name." "No, you do not." "He was at the Daleby ball," she said faintly. "He was." You spoke to him? Eleanor, you spoke to the Crown Prince of Vent, and did not think to mention it. I did not know who he was. He declined to tell me. A small wild urge to laugh climbed her throat, and she put it down. He called the Duke of Ashford a man who could not count past 10. The Earl stared. Then, for the first time in a week, something flickered behind his eyes that was not despair. A terrible, hopeful, calculating spark she recognized, because it lived in her too, the Hartwell habit of measuring. He is calling at 3, her father said. He is calling here. Today, he called at 3 exactly. The blue and silver footman, the plain dark coat, the grave face, that did not trouble to perform. He sat in her mother's drawing room and drank tea he did not want, and he was courteous to her flustered mother, and grave with her father, and he watched Eleanor over the rim of his cup, with the same frank attention he had turned on her in the orangery, as though she were a problem he had already half solved. And when the tea was done he asked, with perfect composure, to speak with Lady Eleanor alone, and her parents, scandalously, after the briefest glance between them, withdrew. You will think me very strange, the prince said, the moment the door had closed. I already do, your highness. Maximilian, when we are not performing. He set down his cup. The afternoon sun came gold through the window and lay across the carpet between them, and the room smelled of beeswax and hothouse lilies and the faint cooling tea. I will not waste your time with the long approach, because I have watched you, and I think you despise the long approach. I came to England to find a wife. He said it as flatly as he had stated the Duke's failure of arithmetic. Not for love. I have no leisure for love, and you, I think, have just been cured of any appetite for it. I require a marriage. My father's throne is not so secure as the maps suggest, and an English alliance, the right English alliance, an old name, a clever woman who can hold a room, would steady a great deal. Eleanor's hands had gone cold in her lap. You are offering me a crown. Eventually, a position. A use. His dark eyes did not waver. I watched you walk into that gallery, knowing the whole of London had come to feast on you, and I watched you give them nothing. I do not want a girl who weeps, Lady Eleanor. I want a woman who measures. The Duke counted that against you. I count it the whole of your worth. The word landed exactly where Julian's had, measure, but turned now, reversed, made into a coin rather than a wound, and she felt the breath go out of her. You understand what you are saying, she managed. You are a stranger. I met you in a glass house for the length of one conversation. And in that conversation you told me the truth and asked nothing of me. That is more than I have had from anyone since I crossed the Channel. For the first time something almost like warmth crossed the carved face, and was gone. I do not ask you to decide today. I ask you to consider it. There is a ball at the Vent Embassy before the week is out. The whole of your ton will be there, and your Duke, and his widow, and every lady who left a card of regret on your mother's table this week. He rose, and he was very tall, and the gold light stood all around him. Come to it as my betrothed, Lady Eleanor. Walk into that room on my arm, and let us see how London enjoys you then. He bowed, not the shallow, correct bow Julian had given her in the rose garden, but something deeper, deliberate, a bow that meant it, and he was gone before she had found a single word, and the door had shut, and the lilies breathed their heavy sweetness into a silence that roared. Eleanor sat alone in the gold-barred light, with her cold hands knotted in her amber skirts, and one sentence going round and round in her, like a struck bell. Come to it, as my betrothed. She thought of the rose garden, the snick of the shears. She thought of Mrs. Crane's peacock triumph, and the small stiff cards of regret, and her father's gripping hands at the library window. She thought, against all sense, of a green-lit orangery, and a man who had said you walk like a woman crossing her own ground. She did not yet know that to say yes would cost her far more than the Duke ever had, that the Prince of Vent carried his own ruin folded inside that grave face, and that the embassy ball was not an ending, but the first step onto a much higher, and more dangerous floor. She only knew that somewhere in the house a clock was striking the half hour, bright and careless, and that for the first time in a week she was not afraid of it. She rose and crossed to the writing desk and drew a clean sheet toward her and reached for the pen. The pen was cold between her fingers, and the ink ran too thin off the nib. And Eleanor sat a long moment, with her hand poised over the clean sheet, while the lilies on the mantel breathed their heavy sweetness across the room. She had meant to write yes. She found she could not make her hand shape so naked a word. Instead, she wrote, in the small even script her governess had whipped into her, "I will come to your ball. We shall speak there of what comes after." She did not sign it with any of the words Julian had used. She sealed it plain, with no device but a thumbprint pressed into the wax, and she rang for a footman before her courage cooled. The bell had scarcely stopped swinging when the door came open without a knock, and her Aunt Beatrice filled the frame, black wig pushed a degree more crooked than usual. Lorgnette already up. Your mother is on the stairs with her salts, and your father is in the hall walking a hole in the turkey carpet, Beatrice announced, and the pair of them are saying Crown Prince to one another, as though the words were communion wine. Now, before they descend upon you and ruin everything with hope, tell your old aunt the truth. What did the man actually say? Eleanor pressed the seal flat with her thumb and watched the wax go from glossy to dull. He said he wished to marry me. They all say that. He said he did not love me, had no leisure to, and counted that the chief recommendation between us. She lifted her eyes. He said the Duke had counted my measuring against me, and that he counted it the whole of my worth. Beatrice came into the room slowly, and the teasing went out of her broad, handsome face, and she lowered herself into the chair across the desk, with a creak of stays and old bones. The smell of her came with her, violets and snuff, and a faint warm dust. The smell of Eleanor's whole childhood. That, the old woman said at last, is either the cleverest thing a man has ever said to you, or the cruelest. And the devil of it is I cannot tell which, and neither, child, can you. No. A man who wants nothing of your heart cannot break it. There is a cold sort of safety in that. Beatrice turned the lorgnette over in her fingers. But mark me, Eleanor. A throne is not a drawing room. You think London is a nest of vipers, and it is. I have lived among them 60 years and I should know. But these are vipers whose mothers you have dined with. You speak their tongue. Across the water you will be a stranger in a court that wanted one of its own, and every kindness will have a hook in it, and you will not know which fork to mistrust. She paused. He is very handsome, I suppose. He is not handsome at all, Eleanor said, and was surprised by the truth of it as she said it. He has a face like a coin somebody hammered hard. You could not call it handsome. Worse and worse, said Beatrice, with gloomy relish. A handsome man you may manage. A man with an interesting face will keep you up at night wondering what he is thinking, and that is how clever women come to grief. She heaved herself up. Send your note. Go to the ball. But promise me you will keep one foot on the ground while the rest of you is being crowned, because I have watched a great many people fall in love with their own rescue, and never noticed the rescuer until the bill arrived. The footman came. Eleanor gave him the letter. And from the hall below came her father's voice, lifted, almost young again. Is it gone? Has it gone to him? And she heard in it the sound of a man leaning the whole weight of his ruined house against a door he had not yet opened. And she shut her eyes for the length of one breath, and then went down to be embraced. He came again on Friday, and this time he did not pretend to want the tea. We will dispense with it, Maximilian said, the moment her mother had been gently and unmistakably steered from the room by a look. He set his hat and gloves on the side table and did not sit. You wrote that we would speak of what comes after. I find I prefer to speak of it standing. One lies more easily sitting down, and I do not intend to lie to you. That is a great deal of resolve to spend on a stranger, Eleanor said. You will not be a stranger long. He moved to the window, where the July light fell hard and gold across the carpet, and he stood in it the way he had stood in the orangery, as though light were a thing he was accustomed to being looked at within. Here are the terms. Plainly, we are betrothed at my embassy within days. before your whole society and mine. You are conducted to Vent before the autumn. You are crowned princess in the cathedral at Haltenberg when the time is fit. You give me sons, in due course, and a court that does not laugh behind its fans, and the appearance, before the world, of a man whose house is steady. He turned. In exchange you have my name, my protection, the settlement of your father's debts entire, and never again, so long as you live, the smallest necessity of caring what a woman like Mrs. Crane thinks of you. Those are the terms. They are not romantic. I told you I had no leisure for that. Eleanor folded her hands at her waist, over the place where the pearl buttons of her gloves pressed small hard points into her wrists, and she held to that. You speak of my father's debts as though you have read the ledger. I have read the ledger. He said it without apology. I do not buy land I have not walked. I do not marry a house I have not had counted. Your father owes 11,000 and some hundreds, the greater part of it to a wine merchant and a builder in Bath, who will both be glad of their money and discreet about how they came by it. Forgive me. You would think less of me if I had come unprepared, and I would rather be thought thorough than be thought tender. My last suitor was thought tender, Eleanor said. It wore very thin. For the first time something genuine crossed the carved face, not a smile, but the ground a smile might be built on. Yes, I imagine it did. She studied him in the gold light. You have told me a great deal of arithmetic, your highness, and nothing at all of yourself. A woman buying a horse is permitted to look at its teeth. You wish to look at my teeth. I wish to know what I am carrying across the water. You said your father's throne is not so secure as the maps suggest. A clever woman does not put her foot on a stair without knowing which step is rotten. He was quiet a moment, and she watched him decide how much to give her, and she saw, for the smallest instant, before he folded it away, that the question had touched something raw. You are right to ask, he said, and I will answer you. But not in this room, with your mother's ear at the keyhole, and your father pricing my coat. At the ball, I will tell you one true thing at the ball. Before you stand up beside me, so that you choose it knowing. He took up his gloves. Will that content you? It will have to. It will. And then, drawing the glove smooth over his knuckles, he added, almost idly, your duke has applied for an invitation to my embassy on Thursday. Did you know? He wrote to my secretary, a very warm letter, full of the friendship between our nations. His dark eyes lifted to hers. I have instructed that he be granted the worst seat in the room and the best view of you. I find I am not entirely without sentiment after all. I simply spend it carefully. It surprised the laugh out of her. A single startled note she had not given anyone in a week. And she saw it register on him, saw him mark it the way a man marks where a coin has fallen, and she pressed her lips together a beat too late. That, she said, was very nearly a kind thing to do for a cruel reason. It is the only kind I can presently afford, said the prince, and bowed, and was gone. Julian did not write for an invitation to Wexford House. He simply arrived. The following afternoon, his grey beaver hat in his hand, and his fair face arranged into something he plainly believed was concern, and the footman, who had carried the small cards of regret only days before and forgotten nothing, admitted him with a face like a shut drawer. You should not have come, Eleanor said, when she had let him stand a moment in the middle of her mother's drawing room without offering him a chair. I had to. Eleanor. I had to. He turned the hat. The gesture had once seemed boyish to her. Now it only looked like a man with nothing to do with his hands. What I am hearing in every house in London, it cannot be true. The Prince of Vent, they are saying he has offered, that you have accepted. And if I have, then you have lost your senses. He took a step toward her, and the old scent of him reached her, sandalwood and horses, and stirred nothing now but a faint cold memory of having once been undone by it. You do not know this man. 3 weeks he has been in the country. 3 weeks, and you would tie your name, your father's name, to a foreigner whose throne half the chancelleries of Europe expect to come apart in his hands? It is spoken of openly at White's, Eleanor, his father's position. The faction against the marriage party. You would walk into the middle of that. You are remarkably well informed, Eleanor said, for a man whose chief study these past weeks has been the refurbishment of a bride's chamber in yellow. The colour went up his neck. That is unworthy of you. No, it is exactly worthy of me. You taught me the value of it yourself, in my father's rose garden, on the brightest afternoon in July. She kept her voice level, and the levelness was a blade, and she watched it go in. You came here to tell me I was making a mistake. Let me spare you the rest of the speech. You are not afraid for me, Julian. You are afraid for yourself. You set me aside for a widow and a comfortable life, and you expected me to retire quietly into shame, where you might pity me from a distance and feel the better for it. And instead I am to be a princess, and you will have to stand in the worst seat in a foreign embassy and watch me crowned with everyone you know looking on. That is the mistake you came to mourn. Not mine. Yours, he stared at her. Somewhere outside a costermonger cried strawberries, the sound thin and bright through the half-open window, and the heat of the afternoon pressed into the room with the smell of warm carpet and beeswax and the cut roses going over in their bowl. He does not love you, Julian said at last, very low. You know that. A man like that, he is using you. For your name, for the Tory connection, for whatever steadies his house. You will be a piece of furniture in a palace, Eleanor. An English chair he has bought to make his throne look older. And what was I to be at Ashford? She asked. A bandage on my father's books that you tore off when something softer came along. She crossed to the bell and rang it. At least the prince has been honest about what he wants of me. You never managed even that. You let me think it was love for 2 whole seasons because it cost you nothing to let me. Good day to you. James will see you out, and do take the side gate. I find I have a taste for symmetry. He went white then, and put the grey hat on his fair head before he had reached the door. The same careless habit, the same insult of it, and Eleanor stood very straight until the street door had closed behind him, and only then did she sit, rather suddenly, and find that her hands were shaking, not with grief, but with the strange new violence of having been believed. The Vent envoy called at 6, unannounced, which was its own message. He gave his name to the butler as Count Wilhelm von Adler, and when he came into the drawing room, Eleanor understood at once that here was a beautiful man. Beautiful as a frosted pane is beautiful, pale and exact, with silver fair hair, and a mouth that had clearly never once said anything it had not first weighed for profit. He bowed with continental precision. He declined refreshment. He waited, with great courtesy, until her father had been maneuvered from the room by some instinct the Earl himself could not have named. And then he turned to Eleanor and smiled, and the smile did not reach the cool grey eyes at all. Lady Eleanor, I am attached to His Royal Highness's household. I have served his family since before he could walk, and I love him. You will forgive a plain man, a plain word, as I love the dynasty itself. I have come to speak to you as a friend. You have come without an appointment, at the dinner hour, when my betrothal is not 3 days announced, Eleanor said. I do not think you have come as a friend, Count. I think you have come to frighten me. Pray do it directly. I have had a long week of men arranging themselves before they wound me, and I find I prefer the wound. Something flickered behind the pale eyes. Surprise, perhaps even a chill of respect. He inclined his silver head. Very well. Directly, he folded his gloved hands. His Highness's marriage was, until 3 weeks ago, all but settled. There is a lady in Vent, the Gräfin Sophia von Linden, of the oldest blood in the Principality, whose family commands the loyalty of the northern provinces and a third of the army's officers besides. A union between them would have bound the throne and the marriage party into a single fist. It was understood. It was nearly contracted. The Gräfin herself believes it contracted still. He let that settle. And now His Highness crosses to England on a matter of treaty and returns betrothed, within the month, to an Englishwoman with an old name and an empty estate. You will perhaps begin to see, Lady Eleanor, the difficulty. The lilies, the beeswax, the strawberry seller's last faint cry. All of it seemed to thin and recede. He told me there was a faction against the marriage party, she said. He did not tell me there was a woman. No, said the Count softly. I imagine he did not. He is fond, you understand, of telling the truth one careful piece at a time. It is a habit that has served him. It will not serve you. He drew on his gloves, finger by finger, the very gesture Maximilian had made, and she understood it for a court mannerism, a whole country's way of arming the hands. Marry him, and the northern provinces will read it as an insult to the Gurfin and a slap to her house, and they will withdraw their loyalty at the very hour the throne can least spare it. You will not be a princess, Lady Eleanor. You will be the spark to a fire that has been laid in that country for 10 years. And you will be blamed for the burning. I do not say this to frighten you. The grey eyes held hers. I say it because, unlike His Highness, I do you the courtesy of the whole truth at once. Withdraw, plead a maiden's nerves. Let him return to the lady he was always meant to have, and let your name stay clean, and let a great house stand. That is the kindness I have come to offer you. He bowed, and at the door he paused, and added, with exquisite gentleness, he is a man who carries a great weight very lightly, our prince. Do not mistake the lightness for the absence of the weight. Whatever he has not told you, and there is a great deal, he has not told you for a reason. Good evening. And then he was gone, and the room was very still, and Eleanor stood alone among the cooling lilies, with a name turning over and over in her chest like a stone she could not put down. Sophia von Linden. Who believes it contracted still? She did not sleep. She sat by her window through the short summer dark, watching the sky over the rooftops go from violet to grey to the first thin gold, listening to the watch call the hours. And somewhere near 3 she heard, faint and clear across the sleeping square, a clock strike the half, bright, careless, indifferent, and for once it did not steady her at all. In the morning, a note came on heavy cream paper she now knew at a glance, sealed in glossy red wax, with the crowned device. I am told von Adler called upon you. I am told a great deal. It is the chief occupation of my household. Whatever he has said to you, it is some part true and some part poison, and I cannot untangle the two for you in ink. Ride with me. There is a quiet hour at the park before the fashionable world wakes, and I would rather you heard the dangerous things from me. She went. Of course she went. Aunt Beatrice, finding her in the hall in her green riding habit at 7:30, took one look and said only, "Keep one foot on the ground, child," and let her go. The park at that hour was washed clean and empty, the dew still grey on the grass, the great trees hanging heavy and motionless in the windless heat already gathering, and he was waiting where the tan track ran beneath the limes. Mounted on a black horse, plainly dressed, bareheaded, he turned the horse alongside hers, without a word, and they rode a while in the green hush, the only sound the creak of leather and the soft fall of hooves, and, somewhere, a blackbird working its way through the morning. You did not tell me her name, Eleanor said at last. No, you said you would not lie to me, and then you sent me to bargain over my own future without the one fact that signifies most in it. She kept her eyes on the track. The Gurfin von Linden believes herself contracted to you. The Count says the North will rise if you set her aside for me. You let me write I will come to your ball without knowing that I was being made the cause of another woman's ruin. You did to her. You are doing to her. Precisely what the Duke did to me. That reached him. She saw his hands tighten on the rein, saw the black horse toss its head at the check, and when he spoke his voice had lost its smooth certainty for the first time since the orangery. It is not the same, he said, and it is exactly as bad as you think, and both of those are true at once, which is the whole misery of my position. He drew the horse up beneath the limes and turned in the saddle to face her, and the grave coin of his face had cracked, and what showed beneath it was younger and far more frightened than any prince was permitted to be. Eleanor, there is a thing von Adler did not tell you, because he does not know it. or because he knows it and means to use it last. Sophia von Linden is not a wronged maiden waiting on my honor. She is the keystone of the very faction that means to take my father's throne. The marriage was never an alliance. It was the bridle they meant to put on me. And if I cross back to Vent unwed, or wed to her, my father's house has perhaps a 12-month left in it. His jaw worked. I did not come to England to break a girl's heart for a treaty. I came to find the one weapon that faction has no answer for. An English crown's open favor. A marriage they cannot forbid. A wife they cannot frighten. I came looking for a woman strong enough to be that. And then I watched you walk into the Marchioness's gallery and give 200 people nothing. And I thought, there. That one. If she will only have me, I am saved. The blackbird stopped. The heat hung. Eleanor sat her horse very still beneath the motionless limes and felt the ground she had thought she understood tilt quietly beneath her. Because she had come out expecting to catch him in a cold transaction, and instead, he had handed her, open-palmed, the shape of his own ruin, and she did not yet know whether what she held was the truth, or only the next careful piece of it, cut to the size of her sympathy. "Why tell me this now?" she said slowly, "when you might have kept it for the ball, as you promised, and bound me first." "Because von Adler reached you before I did," Maximilian said. "And a man who lets another tell his wife the truth has already lost her." He paused. "And because I find, God help my poor strategy, that I would rather you came to that room, having chosen the danger with both eyes open, than walked into it believing it safe. That is not arithmetic. I do not know what it is. I have not had the leisure to find out." And before she could answer, before she could so much as draw the breath the answer would need, there came the sound of hooves on the empty track behind them. Many hooves. Unhurried. Fashionable. Too early by an hour for anyone honest. And Eleanor turned in the saddle and saw, riding down the limes toward them through the grey morning light, the Duke of Ashford on his bay, and at his side, mounted side saddle on a glossy chestnut and smiling beneath a peacock-feathered hat, the unmistakable triumphant figure of Mrs. Lavinia Crane. Mrs. Crane reached them first. She brought her chestnut up across the track with the easy seat of a woman who rode well and knew she was watched, and she let the silence sit a moment before she spent it, the peacock feather at her hat trembling in the windless heat. Lady Eleanor. And so, early, one hears such things of the park before breakfast. Her voice was honey-poured slow, warm at the surface and thick beneath. She was a handsome woman of perhaps 30, with auburn hair and a wide soft mouth made for saying cruel things sweetly, and her eyes went from Eleanor's face to the bare-headed man beside her, and brightened with a frank, acquisitive interest. "I do not think we have been presented to your friend." "You have not," Eleanor said. Julian had drawn up his bay a half-length behind, and the colour was already climbing his throat, because he had recognized the plain dark coat and the black horse and the carriage of the man who wore them, and Eleanor watched the recognition arrive in him like cold water. "Lavinia," he said, low, "come away." "Come away? When we are only just arrived?" "Mrs." Crane laughed, a pretty sound. "Julian, do not be tiresome. Present me." "That will not be necessary," said Maximilian. He had not raised his voice. He sat his horse with his hands quiet on the rein, and looked at the two of them with the same unhurried attention he had turned on a violet sky through glass, and something in the look made Mrs. Crane's smile falter at one corner, the way a flame stutters in a drought it cannot find. "His Grace knows who I am," the prince went on, "which is why he has gone the colour of his own coat. As for you, madam," the dark eyes moved over the peacock feather, the glossy chestnut, the triumph she had worn out into the morning like a second gown, "I find I do not need to be presented to you at all. I have had the whole of you described to me already, and the description was generous." The blackbird started up again somewhere in the limes, careless of them all. "You are foreign," Mrs. Crane said, and the honey had thinned. "I am. It is among my smaller faults." He gathered the rein. "Lady Eleanor, the dew is going off the grass and the fashionable hour will be on us directly. I think we have given the park enough to talk of for one morning." But Julian had found his courage in the worst place, as he always did, and he pushed the bay forward a step. "You do not know what you are about," he said. And it was Eleanor he said it to, not the prince, his fair face working. "All of London is saying, 'Eleanor, for God's sake, listen to one man who has known you since you wore your hair down.' This is not a match. This is a card played in a game you cannot see the table of. He will use you and set you down, and there will be no coming back from it. No quiet retirement. Nothing, at least with me." "At least with you," Eleanor said. "I should have had a yellow chamber, and the privilege of watching you choose the curtains for another woman." "Yes, I remember the offer." She turned her grey eyes on him, and they had gone very nearly gold in the early light, and her voice did not lift at all, which made it worse. "You came to the park this morning to be seen forgiving me, Julian, to ride past and pity me, and carry the pity home to your set like a trophy. And instead you find me beneath the limes with a crown, and you cannot bear it, and so you call it concern. Go home. Choose your curtains. You are very good at choosing things you will not have to live with." "Mrs." Crane's chestnut sidled. The peacock feather had gone quite still. "Julian," the widow said, and now there was a new note in the honey, a cool calculating thread. "You did not tell me it had gone so far as this." "It has not gone anywhere," Julian said desperately. "It has gone all the way to a prince of the blood beneath the trees at 7:30, Mrs." Crane returned, and for the first time she looked at Eleanor, not as a woman she had bested, but as a woman she had perhaps misjudged, and the look had something almost like fear at the back of it. She drew her glove smooth. "Good morning, Lady Eleanor. We shall meet again, I do not doubt, in a warmer room. At the Vent Embassy, I believe," said Maximilian pleasantly. "His Grace has applied for a seat. I have seen to it that he shall have an excellent view." He inclined his bare head a precise degree. "Both of you. Do enjoy it." And he turned the black horse and walked it away beneath the limes without haste, and Eleanor turned hers and went with him. And she felt the two of them at her back like a heat on her shoulders all the long way down the green ride, and she did not look round once, and the small dry pleasure of that carried her nearly to the gates before the larger fear came back to claim her. "You enjoyed that," she said. "I did," Maximilian admitted. "It was beneath me and I enjoyed it entirely. I shall do penance later." A muscle moved at the corner of his mouth. "Your duke chooses his moments the way a man chooses the one chair in a room that will tip him onto the floor. I almost feel for him." Almost, it surprised a breath of laughter out of her again, and again she saw him mark where it fell, and this time she let it stand. But the lightness lasted only as far as the open gate, where a groom in blue and silver waited with a face too carefully blank, and a folded paper, and the morning closed over her head again, like water. The paper was for the prince, not for her, and she watched him read it on horseback in the flat gold light at the park gate, watched the ground a smile had nearly stood on go hard and level again, watched the coin reassemble itself feature by feature, until the man she had ridden out with was gone, and the Crown Prince of Vent sat in his place. "What is it?" she said, not a question. She had learned, in a single week of being lied to by tender men, the particular stillness that comes before the next careful piece is cut. "A ship docked at Dover on the evening tide," Maximilian said. He folded the paper once, twice with great economy, and a travelling carriage came up the Dover road through the night and was admitted to a house in Portman Square at 6 o'clock this morning. A house leased a fortnight ago by an agent, in a name that means nothing. Von Adler's name is behind it. It would be. He looked at her. "The Gräfin Sophia von Linden is in London. Lady Eleanor. She arrived while you and I were watching a blackbird. The heat pressed down. Somewhere beyond the railings the city was waking. A cart, a cry, the iron clatter of a shop's shutters going up. And Eleanor sat her horse and felt every separate sound of it land on her skin. She has come for you, she said. She has come for the throne. I am merely where it is kept. He gathered the rein. Go home. Say nothing to your father yet. He will price it and frighten himself. I must learn what she means to do, and I have a day at most before the whole of your society learns she is here and writes the rest of the story for us." For an instant the level voice cracked, just once, like ice over moving water. "Eleanor, whatever you are told today, and you will be told a great deal, and some of it will be true, hold to nothing until you have had it from me. Will you promise me that much? You ask me to trust the one man who has admitted to telling me the truth in pieces. I ask you to trust the man who is telling you that, which is not nothing." He held her eyes. "It is the only honest thing I have to offer you before tonight, and I am offering it. Will you take it?" She thought of Aunt Beatrice in the hall. "Keep one foot on the ground, child," and of the snick of the gardener's shears, and of how very tired she was of choosing which man to believe. "I will take it as far as Portman Square," she said. "No farther." And she turned her horse for home, and behind her she heard him sit a moment in the rising heat before he rode the other way, toward whatever a Gurfin had crossed a sea to do to him. The card came at noon, and it was not for the prince. The Gurfin Sophia von Linden requests the honor of half an hour of Lady Eleanor Hartwell's time, this afternoon, at 4 o'clock, at her house in Portman Square. The Gurfin trusts her ladyship will see the wisdom of coming alone, and the discourtesy of refusing. "You will not go," her father said. He had the card in both hands, and his face had gone the grey it wore in the library now, as a matter of course. "Eleanor, you will not. A summons, to a stranger's house, alone, the day before. No, I forbid it. You forbade me the Ashford match too, Papa." "In the end," Eleanor said gently, "and a great deal of good it did either of us." She took the card from him. The hand was beautiful, upright, foreign, the downstrokes pressed hard into the paper, the discourtesy of refusing. "She has named the field and the hour. If I do not come, she will write it that I was afraid to, and that story will reach the embassy before I do. I would rather meet her with my own face on than have her draw me one." Beatrice, from the window seat where she had installed herself with her lorgnette and a refusal to be sent away, made a low sound in her throat. "She is right, Wexford, and you know it, and you hate it. The girl cannot win this from behind a door." The old woman heaved round. "But you do not go alone, Eleanor. Summons or no summons, I shall sit in the carriage at the curb the whole half hour, and if you are not out by the 4:30, I shall come up those steps myself, and make such a noise as Portman Square has not heard since the Gordon troubles. A foreign countess is one thing. An English aunt in a temper is a force no chancellery in Europe has yet found the answer to." Despite the cold weight under her stays, Eleanor crossed the room and kissed the powdered cheek. "You are the only general I trust," she said. "I am the only one who has lost as many battles as you are about to," said Beatrice, and survived to be rude about it. "Go and dress. Wear the garnets. Let us see you are not a girl she can frighten with good furniture." The house in Portman Square was tall and pale and shut, the blinds half drawn against the 4 o'clock glare, and within it was cool and bare and smelled of beeswax newly applied, and underneath, of a house that had stood empty until a fortnight ago, that faint closed mineral smell of unaired rooms. A servant who spoke no English at all led Eleanor up a staircase that carried no pictures, into a drawing room where the furniture still wore its Holland covers on every piece but two, and where a woman stood at the window with her back to the door, slender and very straight, in a gown of dove-grey so plain it was its own kind of arrogance. She turned, and Eleanor understood, with a small inward drop, that here was the most beautiful woman she had ever stood in a room with, pale gold hair drawn smooth, a face of cold flawless symmetry, eyes the grey of a winter sea, and a stillness in her that made Eleanor's own hard-won composure feel suddenly like a thing learned only that morning. "So," said the Gräfin von Linden. Her English was exact, each consonant set down like a coin on a counter. "You are the Englishwoman. I am Eleanor Hartwell. You are a name an empty house has hung itself upon. I have read your father's accounts. They make sad reading." She moved to a covered chair and did not uncover it, and did not offer one to Eleanor. "Sit, if you wish. I shall not be long, and I think you will not wish to sit when I have finished, so perhaps you had better stand and have the journey already made." "I will stand," Eleanor said, "since you have arranged the room so kindly to require it." Something passed across the perfect face. Not a smile, but the cold acknowledgement of a blow well placed. "He told me you had a tongue." He was right in that, at least, among the many things he has been wrong in. He, Maximilian, the Gerfin, said the name the way one says the name of a place one owns. "You imagine I have come to plead with you, to weep, perhaps, and show you a wronged woman's heart, and beg you to step aside." She drew off one grey glove, finger by finger, that same court mannerism, a country's whole way of arming the hands, and laid it on the Holland cover. "I have not. I have come to show you a letter." The cold came up through the bare boards into Eleanor's thin slippers, and she stood very straight in her garnets and her brandy-coloured silk, and watched the Gerfin draw a folded sheet from a writing case on the covered table, a sheet creased soft with carrying, its red seal broken. "You will know his hand," the Gerfin said. "You have had what? 2 notes of it?" "3? I have had 11 years of it. I could draw you every letter blind." She did not give the sheet into Eleanor's hand. She held it up, open, at the length of her arm, so that Eleanor must come to it, must close the distance herself, and Eleanor came, because to refuse was to be afraid, and read. It was his hand. There was no mistaking the spare upright strokes she had seen close a note with a single initial. The letter was dated in April, 3 months gone, from Haltenberg, and it was addressed to my dear Sophia, and Eleanor's eye went down it the way a foot goes down a dark stair, finding each tread by the falling. "And you are right that the matter cannot rest in air much longer. My father's friends press me, and yours press you, and we are neither of us children to pretend the thing has not been understood between our houses since we were both in the schoolroom. I will not insult you with the language of romance. You would laugh at me, and rightly. But I know of no woman in Vent I would sooner have stand beside the throne, nor any whose blood and sense would steady it as yours would. When I am returned from England, we will make an end of the waiting. You have my word on it, which you know I do not give twice. Your servant, always. M. Your servant always." The room tilted, very quietly, the way the park had tilted beneath the limes. Only this time there was nothing open-palmed held out to catch her. Eleanor stood with the cold coming up through her slippers, and read the 2 words again, and heard, underneath them, perfectly preserved, "Julian in a rose garden, you signed them your servant always. Always, you used the word." And the small flame she had felt kindled that morning on the ride home, pinched out between 2 fingers. "Yes," said the Gerfin softly, watching her face with the attention of a woman reading an instrument. "I thought you would know that phrase. It is his. He spends it carefully. He will have spent it on you too, I do not doubt, in some pretty address." She folded the letter and put it away. "He wrote that to me in April. In June he crossed to your country. In July he stood under some glass-house roof and decided that a ruined Englishwoman with an old name and a desperate father would make a sharper weapon against my family than a marriage to me would make a bridle upon him. That is all you are, Lady Eleanor. You are the knife he chose, because it was cheaper than the sword. I have not come to beg you to drop it. I have come to make certain you know whose hand is on the hilt, and that it is not yours." "You have told me a date," Eleanor said. Her voice came out level, she did not know how. "April, you have shown me a letter 3 months stale. He told me himself this very morning that your marriage was never an alliance but a bridal, that your house means to take his father's throne, and that he sought in England a wife your faction could not forbid. You have shown me nothing he did not say first." The grey eyes did not waver. "Did he tell you," the Gerfin said, "that he knew the Duke of Ashford meant to set you aside before the Duke had done it?" The 4 o'clock glare lay flat and gold across the Holland covers, and outside in the square a horse stamped, and a child laughed, and a bell somewhere struck the quarter, and Eleanor stood in the cold bare room and felt the question go into her like the seam of a pearl button pressed too hard. "That is a lie," she said. "It is the one thing in this room that is not." The Gerfin took up her glove again and drew it on, finger by finger, unhurried, His household has had men in London since the spring. Von Adler keeps them. It is his particular art. They knew of Mrs. Crane before your mother did. They knew the Duke would cry off after the breakfast was spoken of. These things leave a trail. A debt paid. A jeweller consulted. A widow's bills suddenly settled by a ducal hand. Maximilian came to the Marchioness of Dalaby's ball that night because he knew you would be there, freshly broken and freshly useful. The orangery was not chance, Lady Eleanor. Nothing he does is chance. He chose the hour, the room, the green light, and the line. You walk like a woman crossing her own ground, the way a hand on a stage chooses its mark. He has told you the truth in pieces, has he not? He is proud of that. He thinks it makes him honest. She drew the second glove smooth and looked at Eleanor with something that was very nearly, for one cold instant, pity. A man who hands you the truth in pieces is not being honest. He is being careful that no single piece is large enough to make you run before the trap is sprung. I have given you the whole of it at once. Now you may do as you like with it. The carriage will see you down. Good afternoon. She did not remember the stair, or the foreign servant, or the door. She remembered the heat of the square coming up off the paving like an open oven after the cold of the house, and the blessed sight of her aunt's wide, handsome face at the carriage window, and then the lurch and rattle of the wheels, and Beatrice's voice, somewhere above her, saying, "Child, child, what has she done to you?" And her own hands, ungloved now, though she could not recall taking the gloves off, lying open and empty in her amber lap. "She showed me a letter," Eleanor heard herself say. "April, your servant, always." He wrote it to her in April. The words came out flat and small. It is Julian's phrase. It is the very phrase. They both used it. 2 men, 2 countries, the same 2 words, and I believed it both times. A letter 3 months old proves nothing but that he was once where every man of his rank is got to be, Beatrice said sharply, gripping her wrist. "What else? There is worse. I can see it on you. What else did the cold creature say?" So Eleanor told her, the men in London since the spring, the trail of a debt paid and a widow's bills settled, the orangery chosen like a mark on a stage, the line delivered to land. And Beatrice listened with her lorgnette forgotten in her lap and her black wig more crooked than Eleanor had ever seen it, and when it was done, the old woman sat back against the squabs and was silent for the length of 3 streets, which from Beatrice was a thing more frightening than any speech. "It hangs together too well," she said at last. "That is what makes it true. No, child, that is what makes it built." Beatrice's small bright eyes had gone hard and shrewd. A thing that hangs together perfectly has been made to hang together. Life does not come so neat. The Gräfin gave you a story with no loose thread in it, no awkwardness, no place where it does not quite meet. And a true thing always has such a place. Because the truth is clumsy and a lie is tidy. She wants you frightened off by tonight. She has built you the precise machine to do it. The old woman gripped her hand harder. "But Eleanor, and this is the devil of it, this is the trap inside the trap. Built does not mean false. The most dangerous lie is the one assembled out of true pieces. He may have known of your jilting. He may have chosen that orangery. And it may still be true that he sat his horse this morning and told you a thing he had no strategy for telling. Both, at once. That is the country you are about to marry into, where every truth is also a weapon, and you will never again hold one without cutting your hand." The carriage swung into their own street, and the bells of St. George's came over the rooftops bright and careless, ringing the half-hour for nobody, and Eleanor sat with her empty hands open in her lap and found that for the first time the sound did not steady her, and did not frighten her either. It simply rang, indifferent, over a city full of people arranging themselves before they wounded her. "I have to ask him," she said. "You have to ask him," Beatrice agreed grimly, "and you have to watch his face when you do, and you will not be able to read it, because a man who has handed out the truth in slices for 30 years has a face like a shutbank. And then you will have to choose anyway, tonight, on no better ground than your own judgment of a stranger." She patted the cold hand once, roughly. "Welcome to it. This is what they never tell debutante. The whole of being a woman of sense is choosing in the dark and answering for it in the daylight. He came at 8, the evening of the ball, when she was already dressed for it, and that he came at all, on the one night the whole of 2 societies expected him at his own embassy receiving his own guests, told her something before he had said a word. She received him alone in the small back parlour, by her own arrangement, with no fire lit against the summer warmth, and only a branch of candles burning, and she stood with her back to the cold hearth, in a gown of midnight silk sewn over with seed pearl, the garnets dark as old wine at her throat, and she did not sit, and did not offer him a chair, and she watched him take in the arrangement of the room, the deliberate echo of Portman Square, and understand it. "You have seen the Gherfin," he said. "At 4 o'clock. By summons. She arranged a room very like this one to make her point, so I have returned the compliment." Eleanor folded her hands at her waist over the place where, tonight, there were no pearl buttons to press into her wrists, and she missed them, and held herself straight without them. "She showed me a letter in your hand. April, your servant, always. Did you write it?" A pause. "1, I did. She says you knew the Duke meant to set me aside before he did it, that your men had it from London in the spring, that the orangery was not chance, that you chose the hour and the room, and the green light, and the very line you said to me, the way a hand on a stage chooses its mark, because I was freshly broken and freshly useful, and a cheaper weapon than a sword." She kept her eyes on his face, on the carved coin of it, hunting the place where it would not quite meet, the clumsy true seam Beatrice had taught her to look for. "Tell me she lied. Tell me it was chance. Tell me one thing, plainly, all at once, with no careful slice of it kept back for later, and look at me while you do it." And she watched the bank's shut face, and she saw the thing she had been most afraid of, which was that it did not flinch. "I cannot tell you it was chance," Maximilian said quietly, "because it was not." The candles burned. Somewhere in the house a clock she could not see ticked into the silence. "I knew of Mrs. Crane in May," he went on, and he did not look away, and that was either the worst of him or the best, and she could not tell which was the whole of the misery. "Von Adler's men had it. I knew the breakfast was spoken of, and what a breakfast spoken of means, before your mother poured the Duke his ratafia. I knew you would be at the Dalaby ball, because a woman of your name does not hide on the first night, and I went into that orangery to wait for you, because I had been told you were the strongest woman in London, going spare. And I needed the strongest woman in London, and I meant to have her. All of that is true. The Gherfin built it well, because she built it out of true things." He took one step nearer, and the candlelight moved over him. "And the line was not a line. I have watched 1,000 people walk into rooms, and I said to you the truest thing I had seen in 3 weeks, and I would say it again now. On no stage, with nothing to gain by it. Because in an hour you will either come to my embassy, or you will not, and either way it will have been true. You do walk like a woman crossing her own ground. I did not invent that to catch you. I only used a true thing to do it. That is the worst of me, Eleanor. I will not pretend it is better than it is. I use true things. I have never in my life had the leisure to do otherwise. And the letter," she said. Her voice had gone very low. "Your servant, always, to her. In April. To me you have never once signed a single soft word. And now I know why. Because you had already spent them, 3 months gone, on the woman whose ruin I am to be." For the first time the seam showed. It was small, and it was at the corner of his eyes, and it was the place where the machine did not quite meet, and she could not for her life tell whether it was grief or only the very best performance of it. "I wrote that letter," he said, "to a woman I have since learned is the keystone of the faction that means to bring my father's house down. I wrote your servant, always to my enemy, because in April I did not yet know she was my enemy, and the words cost me nothing, because I did not mean them. To you I have signed nothing soft, because to you, God help me, I have not been able to afford to mean it, and find it false. The empty words I gave her freely. The full ones I have kept from you, because I did not dare spend them until I knew. Believe that or do not. I have no piece of paper to prove a thing I have refused to write down. He drew a breath, and it was not quite steady. There is your whole truth, all at once, with nothing kept back. I have never given it to anyone. I find it is far worse than the careful way. Now you know why I never learned to do it. From the front of the house came a sound. Wheels, the iron ring of a great carriage drawing up at the curb. The embassy carriage in blue and silver come to fetch her, an hour early, as though the night itself had grown impatient. Eleanor heard her father's voice rise in the hall, and her mother's, and under them, steady, her aunt's, holding the door. She stood with her back to the cold hearth and her hands empty at her waist, and looked at the man who had handed her, at last, the whole of himself, and could not tell the gold from the brass of it, and understood that she never would, that this was the choosing in the dark Beatrice had promised, and that there would be no daylight in which to be sure. Only this. Only now. Only the carriage at the curb, and the two societies waiting, and the Gherfin already gowned, and the Duke already seated in his excellent and terrible view. They have come for me, she said. They have. He did not move to her. He stood his ground in the candlelight as he had stood it in the orangery, and let her have the whole width of the room to decide across. You promised me as far as Portman Square, and no farther. I am asking you for the rest of the road. I will not pretend you have any reason to give it to me, but one. The grave voice dropped. I have told you the truth, and asked nothing of you. Twice now. It is still the only thing I have. And the carriage waited, and the candles burned, and somewhere over the rooftops a clock began, bright and careless, to strike the hour, and Eleanor reached up and pressed 2 fingers to the cold wine-dark garnets at her throat, the way she had once held to pearl buttons against capsizing, and she crossed the room toward the door, and toward the carriage, and toward the one room in London where every person who had ever wounded her sat waiting to see which way she would fall. The embassy blazed brighter than the Daleby house had ever dreamed of blazing. Eleanor saw it from 3 streets off, a high white glare against the summer dark, and as the blue and silver carriage turned into the square, the whole front of the building came clear, every window gold, the stone steps carpeted in crimson, footmen ranked like chessmen down to the curb, and above the door a great device of arms she had learned to read in red wax, and now saw worked in living light. The night was warm and close, the air thick with the smell of crushed roses strewn for the wheels and the river beyond, and, under it, hot wax and hothouse green. Somewhere within, a string band had begun. They have lit it like a beacon, her Aunt Beatrice said from the seat opposite, her black wig for once set straight, her emeralds out of their wrappings and burning at her throat. He means the whole of London to see exactly how high you are being carried. Subtle. He is not. He is many things, Eleanor said. Subtle is not among the ones he spends on a public night. The carriage stopped. A footman opened the door, and the noise of the square came in, wheels, hooves, the murmur of the curious crowd pressed against the railings to watch the great folk arrive, and Eleanor sat one moment more, with her gloveless hands open in her midnight lap, the seed pearls on her skirt catching the flambeau like frost. 1 foot on the ground, Beatrice murmured, I remember. I know you do. I say it for myself. The old woman gripped her wrist hard. Once, go and be a princess, child, or go and refuse to be one. Only do it standing up, where they can all see, and let the wounding be theirs tonight for a change. Eleanor went up the crimson stair into the glare, and at the head of it, before the great doors, in plain dark evening dress, among 100 uniforms heavy with gold, stood Maximilian, bareheaded, grave, waiting where the whole assembling world could watch him wait. He had not gone in to receive his guests. He had stood at his own door for the length of an hour, she understood, so that the first thing every soul in that house would witness was the Crown Prince of Vent holding his ground for an Englishwoman who might yet turn the carriage round. You came, he said. As far as the door, Eleanor answered. We have not yet spoken of the rest of the road. No, something moved behind the carved face. We have not. He offered his arm, not the shallow gesture Julian had given her in a rose garden, but his whole arm, deliberate, before 200 pairs of eyes. Then come and let us speak of it where it cannot be whispered. She laid her hand upon his sleeve, and the doors opened, and the heat and light and music broke over them both like a wave. The long gallery of the embassy ran the whole depth of the house, and it was full of the English ton in their summer silks, and the diplomatic corps of half a dozen courts, and the Vent nobility in their northern severity. And as Eleanor came into it on the prince's arm, the room turned toward her the way the Daleby gallery had turned. Only this time the turning carried no contempt in it, only a vast and avid astonishment. Fans stopped, conversation guttered and caught and flared up again twice as bright. She walked into the center of it with her chin level and felt every glance land and slide and come back, and she thought, very clearly, snick, snick, and found the old sound had lost its sting. She saw the Duke of Ashford at once. They had seated him precisely as the prince had promised, at the gallery's far end, against the wall, in a gilt chair set a little apart, with the best view in the house of the great cleared space where the betrothal would be spoken, and no one of any consequence within 10 feet of him to share his disgrace. Mrs. Lavinia Crane sat beside him in her peacock blue, and her wide, soft mouth was not smiling now. Julian's fair face, when it found Eleanor across the brilliant room, had gone the grey of his own coat. "He looks unwell," Eleanor murmured. "He looks," said Maximilian, "like a man who has only this moment finished the sum and arrived at the answer. Give him a little time. He will reach self-pity by the second remove, and be quite comfortable again." It startled the breath of a laugh out of her, there in the center of the staring room, and she let it show, and she felt the watching world record it, the discarded girl, laughing on a prince's arm, and she understood that the laugh had done more work in one instant than an hour of careful dignity. Then the crowd at the gallery's head parted, and the Gräfin Sophia von Linden came through it, and the room's attention swung to her like a compass needle finding north. She had dressed for war. Where Eleanor wore midnight and seed pearl, the Gräfin wore white, stark, flawless, sewn with diamonds at the bodice that threw the candlelight back in cold splinters, and her pale gold hair was dressed with a single coronet of brilliance that announced her rank to every eye in the gallery before she had spoken a word. At her shoulder, silver fair and exact, moved Count Wilhelm von Adler, his face arranged into grave benevolence, his gloved hands folded. The two of them came down the gallery, and the English fell back from them, and the Vent nobility inclined, and Eleanor felt Maximilian's arm go rigid beneath her hand. "There is the keystone," he said, very low, "and there is the hand that holds it in the wall. Whatever they do now, they will do it before the course, where I cannot answer it as a private man. Be ready." "I have been ready since Portman Square," Eleanor said. The Gräfin stopped 6 feet from them, in the cleared center of the gallery, where the whole house could see, and she swept the prince a curtsy of exquisite and insolent perfection. And then she turned her winter-grey eyes upon Eleanor, and let the silence draw long enough that the band, sensing it, faltered and thinned to nothing. "Your Highness," her exact English carried to the gallery's furthest corner. "You will forgive an old friend her plainness. I have crossed a sea on the strength of a letter written in your own hand, and I find on my arrival that London has busied itself marrying you to a stranger. I had thought, between our houses, there was an understanding too old and too deep to be set aside for." She let her gaze travel, slow and pitiless, over Eleanor's gown, her bare hands, the garnets that were not diamonds. "For an afternoon's English novelty." A sound went through the gallery, a sibilant rustle of indrawn breath and lifted fans. Across the room, Mrs. Crane leaned forward in her gilt chair, and the Duke of Ashford's grey face turned hopeful. It was, Eleanor saw, a beautifully made thing. The Gräfin had not accused. She had grieved, publicly, with a wronged woman's dignity, and in grieving had hung the whole question in the air before the diplomats of 6 courts. Is the Crown Prince of Vent a man who breaks his sworn word for novelty? And there was no answer Maximilian could give that would not make it worse. To deny the letter was to call her a liar before the corps. To own it was to confess himself faithless. He had told her the truth came at him in pieces. Here was a piece cut precisely to open a vein. She felt him draw the breath to answer, and she pressed her fingers once into his sleeve, and she stepped forward herself into the cleared centre, alone, where the Duke had the best view in the house.
Gräfin.
Eleanor's voice did not lift, and the not lifting made the gallery lean to hear it.
You speak of a letter written in April, and you are right to. I have read it. Your servant, always. A graceful phrase. I have some acquaintance with it, as it happens. I was given the very same words once, in a rose garden, by a gentleman who is here tonight.
She did not look at Julian. She did not need to. The whole room looked for her.
So I know exactly what such a phrase is worth, and exactly what it weighs. And I will tell you plainly before all these good people. It weighs nothing at all. It is the coin men spend when they have nothing dearer in the purse. You have crossed a sea to show me a 3-month-old letter full of empty words. I am the last woman in England you could frighten with one.
The Gräfin's flawless face did not move, but the diamonds at her bodice trembled once with her breath.
You make light of a sworn understanding, she said. No, I make light of you, madam, which is a different thing. And I will tell this room why.
Eleanor turned, slowly, so that she spoke now not to the Gräfin, but to the gallery, to the ambassadors and the ministers and the grave northern lords, and she felt the cold, clear engine of her own mind take hold. The thing the Duke had counted against her, and the Prince had counted her whole worth.
A wronged bride, with an old understanding and the loyalty of the northern provinces behind her, has the King of Vent, the courts of Vent, the church at Haltenberg, and every honourable channel of 2 nations in which to seek her remedy. She does not need to skulk. She does not need a house leased a fortnight since by an agent in a false name with the blinds drawn against the day.
A stir ran through the Vent nobility. She had struck something, and she pressed it.
Yet that is precisely how the Gräfin von Linden has come to London, in secret, by night, to a borrowed house in Portman Square, to summon a private gentlewoman to a room stripped of its furniture, and there work upon her in the dark. I ask this distinguished company a single question.
Is that the conduct of a wronged and honourable woman appealing to justice? She let it hang one beat. Or is it the conduct of an agent sent ahead of an army's loyalty to remove an obstacle before the obstacle can be made safe? The gallery did not breathe. Von Adler's grave benevolence had gone very still indeed. You overreach, Lady Eleanor, the Count said softly, stepping forward. These are grave words to fling about in a room of diplomats. They are, Eleanor agreed. And I notice it is you who answers them, Count, and not the Gräfin. You, who keep the men in London who knew of my jilting before my own mother did. You, who leased the empty house. You, who came to my father's drawing room to do me the courtesy of the whole truth at once, so that I might be frightened off and a great house spared. She smiled, and it was not a kind smile, and the room saw it. I have learned a great deal about your court in a fortnight, sir. I have learned that a story which hangs together too perfectly has been built to hang together. Yours was a very fine machine, but you wound it one turn too tight, and I have spent my whole life among people who arranged themselves before they wound me, and I have grown quick at hearing the spring. For the first time since the white-clad woman had entered, Maximilian moved. He came to stand at Eleanor's shoulder, and when he spoke his voice carried the flat finality she had heard him use on Mrs. Crane beneath the limes. The voice that did not need to be raised, because nothing in the room would dare cover it. The Gräfin von Linden, he said, is the keystone of a faction in my country that has spent 10 years laying the ground to bring my father's house down. The marriage she calls an understanding was a bridal they meant to fit to me, and the letter she has carried across the sea was written by a young man in April who did not yet know his oldest friends had become his enemies. That is the truth, plainly, all at once, and I had thought I would have to spend the rest of my life proving it. He looked at Eleanor, and the carved coin of his face cracked clean down its seam, and what showed beneath it this time he made no attempt to fold away. And then this lady proved it for me, in 4 minutes, before the cause of 6 courts, with nothing in her hand but her own clear head. Von Adler, you came to frighten a gentlewoman. You will find you have armed her instead. The Count's pale composure had thinned to a blade's edge. Your Highness will regret, I will regret a great many things, Maximilian said. I find I do not tonight regret this one. And then he did the thing that emptied the breath from Eleanor's chest, the thing she would turn over for the rest of her life and never quite reach the bottom of, because he did it not in private and not by halves, but in the full glare of the gallery, where it could cost him everything, and where everyone he ruled and everyone who wished to unseat him stood watching to see whether he meant it. He turned from the Gräfin, and from the Count, and from the watching corps, and he faced Eleanor, and he took both her bare hands in his. I brought you here to be a weapon, he said. I will not insult you on this of all nights by pretending otherwise. This whole room has heard it said, and I will not have you carry a lie out of it. I found the strongest woman in London going spare, and I meant to use her to save my house, and I told myself that was honest, because I told you so. But a man cannot save an honourable thing by a dishonourable means, and I have known it since the orangery and refused to hear it. His hands tightened on hers. So here it is, plainly, before them all. I release you. You owe me nothing, not your name, not your hand, not so much as the rest of this evening. Walk out of this house tonight, and your father's debts are paid regardless, and the carriage is yours, and not one soul of mine will ever trouble you again. I would sooner lose vent to that woman and her army than buy it with a wife who has already been sold once. You came to me believing it was safe. I will not let you stand up beside me until you know it is not, and choose it anyway, or choose to go. The choice is yours. It was always supposed to be hers. A glance at the Gräfin, hard as a thrown stone, and they made it a bridle. I will not make you a knife. The gallery was utterly silent. 200 faces hung upon the cleared centre of the room, and at its far end the Duke of Ashford sat forward in his excellent chair, with his grey face working. Because he had just watched a man surrender a throne's worth of advantage for the sake of a woman, and he had not, in 3 years, surrendered so much as a grey beaver hat. Eleanor stood with her bare hands in the prince's, and the whole brilliant, cruel, watching world arranged to see which way she would fall, and she found, to her own astonishment, that the falling had stopped being frightening some while ago, somewhere on the long ride down the limes, and that what she felt now was something she had no practice at, and could barely name. The floor steady under her feet for the first time since a rose garden, because at last she stood on ground she had not borrowed from anyone. You have handed me the whole of yourself, she said, and asked nothing. 3 times now. It is still the only thing I have. It is enough. Her voice carried. She meant it to. It is more than I was offered by a man who swore he loved me. You have offered me a clear head and an open door, and the truth before witnesses. And I find, Your Highness, that I am a woman who would rather measure than be flattered, and you are the only man in 2 countries who counts that a virtue. She closed her cold fingers around his warm ones, hard, the way she had once held to pearl buttons against capsizing, only there was nothing now to capsize from. So I will not go out by the door. I will stand up beside you. Not because you saved me. I had begun to save myself, and I should have managed it. Because you are the first person who ever looked at the whole of me and did not flinch, and I have decided that I should like to spend a life learning the rest of you. Slice by careful slice until I have the whole. She turned her grey eyes, gone gold in the candle blaze, upon the woman in white. Gerfin, you may tell the North that the Englishwoman was not a knife after all. She was a choice. There is no faction in Europe that has yet found the answer to a marriage freely made before the eyes of 6 courts. You have crossed a sea to spring a trap, and you have sprung it, and there is nothing inside but 2 people who mean it. A sound broke over the gallery then, not the hiss of fans this time, but a swelling murmur, and from somewhere among the English ranks a single pair of hands began to clap, and another. And then the diplomatic course took it up, grave men in gold lace applauding an alliance no faction could now unmake, and the northern lords of Vent looked at one another and at the Gerfin, and slowly, one by one, began to bow toward their prince and his English bride. The Gerfin von Linden stood in the center of the cleared floor, with the cold splinters of her diamonds throwing back a light that had stopped being hers. For one moment Eleanor saw the flawless face hold, and then, beneath it, something give way. Not grief exactly, but the bone-deep exhaustion of a woman who has carried a heavy thing a very long way to set it down in the wrong place, and Eleanor understood, with a pity she had not expected and could not refuse, that the Gerfin too had been someone's weapon once, fitted to the bridle young, and had never been off at the door. Von Adler reached for her elbow. "We are finished here," he said, low and urgent. "Come away." In a moment, Wilhelm the Gerfin shook off the gloved hand. She drew from the bosom of her white gown a folded sheet. Eleanor knew it at once, the soft creased letter, the broken red seal, and she crossed the cleared floor alone, past the applauding corps, and she stopped before Eleanor and held it out. Not at arm's length now, but openly, on her flat pale palm. For the taking. "Keep it," the Gerfin said, and only Eleanor and the prince stood close enough to hear. "Your servant, always. You were right, it weighs nothing. I have carried it 11 years, and it has cost me everything I might have been, and I find I do not want it across the water with me." Eleanor took the letter. The paper was warm from the woman's breast and very light. "There is one line in it I never showed you. The last. Read it some day when you are angry with him, and remember that even the empty words a man writes to his enemy are honester than the full ones some men never write at all." For the briefest instant the winter-grey eyes thawed. "He has handed you the door. No one ever handed me one. Walk through it well." She inclined her gold head a precise degree, to Eleanor and not to the prince, and turned, and went up the gallery through the parting crowd, with her spine straight as a sword. And Count von Adler went after her, his pale exact face a closed and emptied bank. And the great doors took them both, and the faction that had been 10 years in the laying went out into the summer dark, with nothing in its hands. Eleanor unfolded the letter, there beside the prince, and found the last line her eye had skipped on a cold afternoon in Portman Square. "Below your servant always, in the spare upright strokes," he had written, "though I think you and I shall never learn the trick of meaning it, which is perhaps the saddest thing our 2 houses have made of us." "You wrote that to your enemy," she said. "I did not know she was my enemy. I knew only that neither of us had ever been let to mean a word in our lives." Maximilian looked at the line over her shoulder, and his jaw moved. "I have spent a great deal of tonight learning to mean things, Eleanor. I find it is far worse than the careful way, and I am not going back." Across the gallery, the Duke of Ashford rose from his excellent chair. For one moment Eleanor thought he meant to come to her, to make some last speech of warning or of grief, and she braced for it. But the room had turned, the whole bright weight of 2 societies had turned toward the prince and his bride, and away from the discarded man in the best seat. And Julian stood in the center of his own disgrace, and found there was no one looking at him at all. Mrs. Crane was already gathering her peacock skirts, already glancing toward the doors, already calculating, Eleanor saw, the cost of having been seen all season on the arm of a man the Crown Prince of Vent had seated against the wall. The widow caught Eleanor's eye across the brilliant room, and dropped her a curtsy. Small, exact, the curtsy one gives a woman one has badly misjudged, and steered the Duke of Ashford toward the side door, the servants' door, the door for those who leave before they are asked to. He put his grey beaver hat upon his fair head before he had reached it, the old careless habit, the small last insult to himself, and was gone. "He will tell his set he wished us joy," Eleanor said. "He will tell his set a great many things." Maximilian drew her hand back through his arm, and the band, recovering its courage, struck up again, and the gallery began to breathe and move and glitter as a ballroom should. "Let him. We have a betrothal to announce, and your aunt is bearing down upon us through the diplomatic corps like a frigate under full sail, and I find I am rather afraid of her." "You are right to be," Eleanor said. "She has buried 2 husbands and outlived her enemies, and she has been waiting all evening to be rude to a prince. Be brave." Beatrice arrived in a wind of violets and snuff and triumph, her emeralds blazing, her black wig knocked once more to its principled angle, and she looked the Crown Prince of Vent up and down through her lorgnette with the frank, assessing eye of a woman pricing a horse. "So," she said, "you are the coins somebody hammered hard. I have been called worse, madam, and by better-dressed people." "I doubt that very much." But the small bright eyes had warmed, and she lowered the lorgnette. "You gave her the door, young man." "I heard it. The whole room heard it. You stood up before 6 courts and handed my niece her freedom on the one night you could least afford to, and you let her choose you on no ground but her own judgment." She prodded his chest once with the lorgnette. "That was either the cleverest thing a man has ever done in this house, or the most honest, and the devil of it is, I find I can tell after all. Mind you go on telling her the truth, slice by slice or whole, I care not which, only go on. A girl thrown over once recovers. A girl lied to twice does not." She turned to Eleanor, and her broad, handsome face did a thing it rarely did, which was to be wholly without defenses for a moment. "You kept one foot on the ground, child. I had a good general," Eleanor said, and kissed the soft powdered cheek, and felt the old arms come hard around her, just once, before Beatrice remembered herself, and stepped back and announced to the prince that she should require a very great deal of his country's wine before the evening was out, and that he had better be quick about it. They were married at Haltenberg as the first frost silvered the high northern hills, and Eleanor crossed the cathedral floor on her father's arm, the Earl of Wexford restored to vanity and cheerfulness, his debts paid entire, his house standing, weeping without shame, into a handkerchief the size of a tablecloth, and she felt 2 countries watching her walk into a room again, and she walked it the way she had always walked it, like a woman crossing her own ground. It was the following summer, in the gardens below the palace at Haltenberg, that the story found its quiet ending. The Vent summer came late and kindly, the air thinner and cooler than England's, smelling of pine off the mountains, and warm stone, and the particular green of clipped box, and Eleanor sat in the shade of a lime walk with a dish of cherries beside her, and a country to learn the management of, and a letter from Aunt Beatrice open in her lap, full of London scandal, and the news that the Duke of Ashford had married Mrs. Crane at last, and that the pair of them were said to quarrel beautifully. Somewhere down the long green walk, a gardener's shears went snick. Snick, patient, indifferent. The very sound that had once measured out the worst afternoon of her life in another country's roses. She listened to it now, and found it had become only a sound a garden makes, and she ate a cherry, and was content. A shadow fell across the page. Maximilian came down the lime walk bareheaded, in his shirt sleeves, with the grave coin of his face wearing the small new crack at the corner that 12 months of being made to mean things had worn permanently into it, and he sat beside her on the stone bench and took a cherry without asking, and looked out over his steadied house and his quiet kingdom. "There is a deputation from the northern provinces arrived this morning," he said. 11 of them. They wish to pledge their loyalty formally, and to present my princess with a very ugly ceremonial cup, and to assure me at great length of their devotion to the throne. The same northern provinces that meant to bring your father's house down. The very same. He ate the cherry. I find ruling is largely a matter of being gracious to people who counted on your ruin. I am told one grows used to it. And can you count them? Eleanor asked, gravely, reaching for another cherry. All 11? Or shall I send for an abacus, in case the figure runs away with you? He turned his head and looked at her, and the crack at the corner of his eyes deepened into something that was, at last, unmistakably and entirely a smile. "I can count past 10, he said. "I have been practicing. It is the one accomplishment your Duke and I have never shared, and I mean to keep it." She laughed. The full laugh. The one she had given no one in the week her old life ended. The one he had marked falling in an orangery and learned, over a year, to earn on purpose. And down the lime walk the shears went snick. Snick in the warm, bright air. And from the high white tower of the palace a clock began to strike the half-hour, careless and golden over the steadied kingdom, ringing this time, she thought, for somebody after all. "Without sugar?" Maximilian asked, lifting the cherry dish. "With," said Eleanor, and took his hand, and turned her face up to the northern sun. If this story warmed your evening, stay a while by the fire, subscribe to Adrian's Fireside, and tell me in the comments which line was your favorite. And I shall light another candle, and have the next tale ready before the clock strikes again.